Hello dear students. So in the last class we were discussing regarding the simple permanent tissues. So the permanent tissues are the tissues which has been arised from the meristematic activity of the meristematic cells. So this meristematic cells, they are also called as undifferentiated cells, means we can't differentiate what type of cells are there. Understood? In the while discussing with the simple permanent tissue, there are three types: parenchyma, chloranchyma and sclerenchyma. So based on its function and based on its structure, we can identify it as which type of a tissue. But this is what we are based on its function and structure, what we are distinguishing the tissues. That cannot be done in meristematic tissue because they are undifferentiated cell. So we can't make out the difference what type of tissue it is. So hence the cells are in a continuous stage of cell division. That is the only function of the meristematic tissue. Understood? So hence they are also called as undifferentiated cell. Which cells? Meristematic cells. So now this meristematic cells, it will undergo a mechanism of differentiation to form the permanent tissue. So now this permanent tissue, after the process of differentiation, they will form, or they have stopped the process of cell division, and that group of tissues, they have acquired a particular structure which a particular function. So now this permanent tissue, it is classified into main two categories. One is simple and the another one is complex. So first we have taken with the simple permanent tissues. So in the simple permanent tissue, the first one is parenchyma, the second one is chloranchyma, and the third one is Sclerenchyma. So these are the three types of simple permanent tissue. So in that, first we will take up with the tissue called as parenchyma. So this parenchyma, it is also called as a ground tissue. Why it is called as a ground tissue means the maximum part or in maximum regions of the plant we can see this tissue, and the cells, they are thin walled, or you can say the cell wall is very thin. Cell wall is thin, and we can see a large intercellular space. We can see a large intercellular space. See, this intercellular space is a very important characteristic feature of the parenchyma tissue. And also the parenchyma tissue, it is called as living storage tissue. It is called as living storage tissue. Why it is called as living storage tissue means, as we have already discussed, the cell, it contains a dense cytoplasm, large vacuole with a nucleus towards the periphery. So hence it is a living permanent tissue. The main function is it is involved in storage. Next, so we will write the tissue structure. So the cells are isodiametric in their shape. What is this isodiametric means? The cell, it is equally expanded in all the direction. In all the direction it is equally expanded, hence they are called as isodiametric. The only thing we have to write the intercellular space, and the cell wall, it is made up of cellulose. So the cell wall, main composition of the cell wall is cellulose. So here the cell wall, here the primary cell wall, it is made up of cellulose, or just in simple you can say the cell wall is made up of cellulose. So this is, let us consider this as a parenchyma tissue. So inside the parenchyma tissue we can see a large vacuole. A large vacuole is there. So vacuole is one of the characteristic feature of the plant tissues. So inside the vacuole we can see a fluidous substance which contains both useful as well as waste material. Vacuole. The membrane of the vacuole, it is called as tonoplast. So maximum portion of the cytoplasm is occupied by the vacuole in the plant cell. So this is vacuole, and the space in between the cells is called as intercellular If I use the word intra, I-N-T-R-A, that refers to inside the cell, but inter means in between. So in between the cells we can see a space called as intercellular space. Next, we can see a large nucleus which is towards the periphery. As the vacuole is occupied, the major part of the cytoplasm, hence the nucleus will be pushed towards the periphery in the plant cell. Whereas in animal cell we can see a large nucleus at the center of a cell, but here this is the plant cell, so hence it is periphery. And also we can see dense cytoplasm which contains different organelles, mainly the chloroplast, which is a characteristic feature of the plant cell. So hence, due to the presence of this vacuole, cytoplasm, nucleus, everything, the cell is termed as living. So, cytoplasm. And we have to not thick the cell wall. So whatever the outer line of the cell we have written, it has to be written in a very thin form. It has to be not highlighted or it has to be not thickened. So this is a tissue, parenchyma tissue. So what is the function of this parenchyma tissue? The main function of the parenchyma tissue is it is involved in the storage. Next, the parenchyma, which is rich with the chloroplast. The parenchyma, the main function, first one is storage. It is involved in storage of nutrients, and in some it is also involved in the storage of water. That is mainly seen in aloe vera plant or the plant which is having a high water content. So that plants contain the parenchyma, it is involved in the storage of water. Next, the more number of chloroplast is an organelle which is mainly involved. It is an organelle which is mainly involved in the process of photosynthesis. So if the more number of chloroplast is seen in parenchyma tissue, then it is called as Chloranchyma. Chloranchyma. See, remember, the Chloranchyma is a type of parenchyma which has rich chloroplast in its cells. Chloroplast is an organelle which is seen in the cytoplasm. So if more number, usually the chloroplast will be there in all the cells. Normal parenchyma also, it contains the chloroplast, but the number of chloroplast, if it is more inside the cell, then that type of a parenchyma is called as Chloranchyma. So Chloranchyma is a type of parenchyma which contains more number of chloroplast. So if it contains more number of chloroplast, then what is the function of this Chloranchyma? So the function of the Chloranchyma is it is involved in photosynthesis. It is involved in photosynthesis. Next, there is another type of cell in the type of parenchyma called as Idioblast. There is another type called as Idioblast. It is a type of parenchyma. This Idioblast parenchyma, it is somewhat elongated cells, parenchyma cells itself, but it is elongated. And this Idioblast, it mainly stores tannins, resins, etc. So mainly the secondary metabolites will be stored in this cells. Which cells? Idioblast, which mainly this type of parenchyma, it is seen in the secondary growth. Next, there is another type of a parenchyma called as Aranchyma. Aranchyma, the word itself, we can see a large air cavities. Understood? We can see a large air cavities inside the cell, means air filled spaces will be there inside the cell. So now let us consider this as Aranchyma. Whatever the vacuole portion is occupied, it is occupied or it is filled with the air. So this type of Aranchyma, it is seen mainly in aquatic plants, where we'll observe in aquatic plants. So what is the function of this Aranchyma antandre? It mainly helps in buoyancy, means it helps in floating, or it maintains the balance in the water body. Understood? So the main function is it is involved in storage, understood, storage of food or storage of nutrient. If more number of chloroplasts is seen, then the type of parenchyma is called as Chloranchyma, which is mainly involved in a mechanism of photosynthesis. And there is a particular type of a parenchyma called as Idioblast. The cells mainly they are elongated, andre salpa udda irutte cells, and this Idioblast they mainly store some secondary metabolites in it. Next, Aranchyma. Aranchyma is a type of parenchyma which is mainly seen in aquatic plant. What is the characteristic feature of Aranchyma? Means the Aranchyma tissue, it contains the air-filled cavities inside the cell, not outside. Inside the cell we can see a air-filled cavities or air-filled spaces are there. This condition or this results in the buoyancy of the plant. So hence these are some of the functions of the parenchyma tissue. So parenchyma, it is mainly called as living storage tissue. So that is about the parenchyma. Next is Chloranchyma. So the Chloranchyma, and also there is another one type called as Parenchyma. This is another type of parenchyma. Parenchyma is another type of parenchyma. So usually in this parenchyma, the cell wall is thick. When compared to other parenchyma cells, the cell wall here it is thick. Remember, whenever we say the cell wall is thick, then it is involved in the function of mechanical, it is involved in providing mechanical support to the plant. So Parenchyma is a type of parenchyma which has a thick cell wall when compared to other parenchyma. Usually what we will say in general characteristic feature, the cell wall of the parenchyma, it is thin cell walled. But there is one exception, that is the Parenchyma. It is a characteristic, it holds the characteristic of the parenchyma itself. Now only the thing which is exception is the cell wall here, it is little bit thick. Due to the thick cell wall, what is the function of this Parenchyma? Means it mainly helps or it provides the mechanical support. So in the examination, they may ask the general characteristic feature of parenchyma with a diagram, or they may ask for 2 marks, what are the function of the parenchyma tissue, or for 1 marks also they may ask name the living storage tissue or name the living simple permanent tissue. The simple living permanent tissue is parenchyma. So that is about the parenchyma. So next one is Chloranchyma. The second type of a simple permanent tissue is Chloranchyma. So the Chloranchyma, it is called as living mechanical, it is called as living mechanical simple permanent tissue. Wherever you come across with the simple permanent tissue, you have to remember the 3 words. Either it may be parenchyma, it may be Chloranchyma, or it may be Sclerenchyma. Simple permanent tissue are 3 types: parenchyma, Chloranchyma and Sclerenchyma. So we are discussing with the second type, Chloranchyma. See, don't get confused the word Chloranchyma with Chloranchyma. If they ask Chloranchyma, it is a type of parenchyma which contains large number of chloroplasts. The main function of the Chloranchyma is it is involved in photosynthesis mechanism. But the Chloranchyma is entirely different. Chlorocolon, that is totally different. So don't get confused. So the Chloranchyma, it is a living mechanical permanent tissue. So if I am saying the word living, means you have to understand, yes, the cell, inside the cell there is a large cytoplasm or dense cytoplasm with a nucleus, vacuole, everything will be there because it is a living tissue. Mechanical tissue. Now in previous I have said that the mechanical support if the tissue is providing means it must have the thick cell wall. So now the characteristic feature of the Chloranchyma means the Chloranchyma, it is a living mechanical tissue, hence the Chloranchyma it possesses large vacuole, nucleus and dense cytoplasm because it is a living tissue. Next, the intercellular space is absent. So this intercellular space was a characteristic feature of what? It was a characteristic feature of the parenchyma, but here the intercellular space is absent. Why it is absent means because here the cell wall is very thick. The cell wall is thick. Then what is the cell wall made up of? Why it is thick? The cell wall means the cell wall is thick due to the deposition of pectin. Very important. Due to the deposition of pectin in the cell wall is very thick. This itself is very important point. So what is the composition of cell wall in Chloranchyma means it contains cellulose. It contains hemicellulose also. Cellulose is a primary thing which has to be present in the cell wall. It is made up of cellulose. Along with the cellulose and hemicellulose, it contains pectin in its secondary wall. So when we will study with the chapter cell structure and its function, there we are going to study with the different parts of a cell. There we are going to study the structure of the cell wall. So the cell wall, again it is differentiated into primary cell wall and secondary cell wall. So primary cell wall, it is usually made up of cellulose and hemicellulose, whereas the secondary cell wall, it is made up of either pectin, in case of Sclerenchyma it is lignin. So now here just remember the cell wall, it is very thick due to the deposition of what? Pectin. And the process of deposition of pectin in the cell wall, that process itself is called as pectinization. It is called as pectinization. Now then what is the function of this Chloranchyma means? The Chloranchyma, as it has a very thick cell wall, it is mainly involved in the providing the mechanical support. Now let us write the diagram of the Chloranchyma. So the Chloranchyma, it is seen in the hypodermis region of the dicot stem, as well as it is also seen in the leaf anatomy. So that we will discuss while discussing with the anatomy of the dicot, leaf or stem, that we will discuss in the upcoming classes. So now this is a cell wall, and the cell wall here, it is very thick and we can't see any intercellular space. The intercellular space is completely absent due to the deposition of pectin. So that process of deposition of pectin itself, it is called as pectinization. So while writing the Chloranchyma tissue, if they ask for diagram for 2 marks, you have to write very thick the cell wall. So that itself is a characteristic feature of the Chloranchyma. So what is this thickness made up of? Means it is made up of pectin. But while writing parenchyma, you have to write it very thin. So thick cell wall. Inside this we will see a large vacuole because it is a living tissue, large vacuole. It is not a nucleus, it is a vacuole, and also we will see a nucleus. Nucleus which is towards the periphery. And also we will see a dense cytoplasm. If the protoplasm is present, then only it is regarded as living. So if the protoplasm is absent inside the cell, if it is empty, there is no protoplasm, then that cell is considered as dead. So this is a dense cytoplasm. So we will label the parts now. Vacuole, nucleus, thick cell wall. The thick cell wall characteristic, it is mainly due to the deposition of pectin, or we can also write it as pectinization. Next, cytoplasm. You can also label no intercellular space. So no intercellular space. So this is about the tissue Chloranchyma. So what is its function? The Chloranchyma tissue function means it mainly provides the mechanical support to the plant. It is seen in different regions of the plant, mainly in the hypodermal region of the dicot stem, and also it is seen above and below the vascular bundles in leaf. So it mainly provides the rigidity, or it provides a support to the plants because of the deposition of pectin. So the word pectin itself is very important while explaining the Chloranchyma. So next we'll move up with the another tissue, that is a Sclerenchyma. So this is about the Chloranchyma. So next, the Sclerenchyma is another type of a mechanical, it is a type of mechanical tissue. It comes under simple permanent tissue. The Sclerenchyma, it is called as dead mechanical simple permanent tissue, SPT. I have written in short form, simple permanent tissue, whereas this was called as living mechanical simple permanent tissue. Which one? Chloranchyma. Whereas here it is called as, very important, dead mechanical simple permanent tissue. They may ask for 1 mark. Name the dead mechanical simple permanent tissue, or dead mechanical permanent tissue. Simple permanent tissue, that is a Sclerenchyma. So now the Sclerenchyma, as we have said, dead, there is no protoplasm. There is no protoplasm inside the cell. Hence, inside the cell there is an empty space. Empty space. Empty space inside the cell is called lumen. What it is called? Lumen. So the lumen, L-U-M-E-N, the lumen is a empty space inside the cell. Next, second point, due to the absence of protoplasm itself, it is called as dead. Now we are saying it is a mechanical tissue, means the cell wall, it must be thick. The cell wall is thick and it is made up of a component called as lignin. lignin. There pectin, here it is lignin. So the lignin is deposited in the cell wall. Next, the undeposited areas of the lignin in the cell wall is called as pit. So undeposited lignin, undeposited lignin region in the cell wall is called pits, P-I-T-S, pits anta antivi. So the Sclerenchyma, again it is divided into two subcategories. One is fibers and the another one is sclerites. Sclerites, or it is also called as stone cells, sclerites or stone cells. So the Sclerenchyma, it is a dead mechanical tissue. So why it is called as dead mechanical tissue means inside the Sclerenchyma there is no protoplasm. So whatever the protoplasm we are seeing inside this cell, so that type of condition is absent in Sclerenchyma. So the empty space, so here there will be no, here the cell, inside the cell completely there will be empty space, that space itself is called as lumen. Next, the cell wall, here in case there, the cell wall it is very thick, and the composition of the cell wall, the same thing, cellulose it contains, hemicellulose in the primary wall, but in the secondary cell wall it is very thick due to the deposition of lignin. Next, the undeposited lignin region in the cell wall, it is termed as pits, P-I-T-S. Next, based on its structure and based on the deposition of lignin, the Sclerenchyma it is divided into two categories. One is fibers as well as another one is sclerites. So that we are going to discuss in the next class about fibers and sclerites. We will write the diagram and we will explain. Thank you.